right.
Hey, family, and welcome to the Critical Sense Making Sessions facilitated by yours truly, Revolutionary Rika. Today's episode is episode 26. Today's topic is the construct of whiteness. Today's guest is Brittany Schlae-Guada. She is a Bay Area resident. She is passionate about her family, learning, and social justice and anti racism work. Brittany, tell us a little bit more about who you are and choose one word to describe how you're showing up.
Thanks so much, Rika. Happy to be here. So, a little bit more about me. I identify as a white queer woman, and that's a big part of my identity. My family means a lot to me. I'm married to my wife, Lori, and I have a son, and they're the lights of my life. I'm also an educator. I teach science right now, and I've always been interested in learning. So, like Rika said, I love to learn. I've been in college way too long, but I keep going. I'm still learning, and yeah, I would say one word to describe how I'm feeling today would just be excited to be here. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Brittany, for agreeing to be on the podcast. And we're going to jump right into our icebreaker question. And so, what is one thing you want to do differently this year than you did last year?
Ooh, that's a great question, Rika. For me, I think that I spent a lot of last year because of quarantine, right? Being afraid, staying inside. And I still have those fears, about going out into the world. But I did a lot of introspection this last year within myself around my own whiteness and how, that was showing up for me. And I think I'm kind of at a point now where I want to move outwards and do more things like this and do outreach and get you know into the communities, right, and helping in those ways. So some of the ways that I'm thinking about doing that is partnering up with organizations like surge, which I'll talk about later, crcaa, allies and accomplices, and actually going out into the community, in a safe way, of course, still minding that obviously COVID is a big issue right now. But yeah, so I guess in one way, right, like still being reflective inward, but then also putting it into action on the outside.
Mm, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just to kind of piggyback off what you said, I did a lot of introspective work last year as well. And that's continuing, but I'm at the phase now where I can actually go and acknowledge and address the trauma that came up for me and not
Mm,
just acknowledge it. Now I'm addressing and trying to manage it and learning to heal from it. So having conversations with people, asking for forgiveness, seeking forgiveness, just a lot of those things have definitely manifested in my life because of last year. So thank you for bringing
mhm.
that, highlighting that. Okay, so I'm going to move us into our first set of questions. And the first question is, the first kind of tell us a little bit about life growing up in Washington State.
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of a story, right? So one thing I think that's really important to know about me is that I was adopted at birth by white parents, and I actually was born in the Bay Area. It wasn't until I was about 5 years old that we moved up to, East Side Seattle area. And growing up in that environment, there were a lot of things that I was just really unaware of. You know, we lived in the burbs, majority white population. Um, and, there's not a lot of experiences with diversity that I had growing up, you know. I remember that, we lived first in these condos in the suburban neighborhoods. That was kind of like low income housing, right? Comparative to the houses that surrounded us. And there was a fence that actually divided the condo association from the low income apartments that were next door. Right. And over the fence, I had friends that were Black. Right. And we would talk to each other through the fence. And that was all really that we were allowed to do. We weren't allowed to go over there. Right. But we would talk through the fence, and that was a rare occurrence to see people of color in my community, right? um, and so even from an early age, I think I had messaging that white people were different, right? My parents would say things like, "Oh, we don't see color, we love all people." But I think it was that perpetuation of colorblind ideology, right? Like the well-meaning white person, right?
Yeah.
Who's like, "Oh, it's okay, if we're different colors, everybody's equal," not really realizing the systemic underpinnings of the
Mhm,
harm of that ideology.
mhm,
So, I, for the greater majority of my life was not really aware of race in America.
mhm,
All of the history in my education that I received as a child was centered on, here was a chunk in time when Black people were treated poorly before the civil rights movement. And after that, whoop, everything's good.
mhm,
Racism's over. Slavery was bad, of course, and
mhm,
now we're in this progressive era, right? And that's what I was taught to believe.
mhm,
It wasn't until much later that I realized a lot of that was a lie, right?
mhm, mhm. Wow, that's a lot. Thank you so much, Brittany, sharing your about your past and your experience and just growing up and what you were exposed to. I think it's critical for us to have these kind of conversations, especially for educators who don't realize that when they come into a classroom, they bring their whole person in. They bring that childhood, that past, those things that, sometimes are dormant because you may not have been using them, but at times they are triggered. And so I appreciate you for sharing and just being honest and authentic about the privileges that you were afforded when you were younger, but more importantly how you were taught more multiculturalism and this
Hmm.
the American dream, so to speak, that we're
Right.
all well, everyone's going to have two kids and a dog. And so I appreciate you for sharing that. That was something that you had to learn later. So as I move us into the second set of questions, how has your privilege shaped your career?
Yeah, it's a big one. I think I had the um I was gonna say luck, but it's not luck. I had the privilege of
Mhm,
being put into a really great educational system, right? That was funded by and surrounded with, the suburbs, lots of
mhm,
money in those homes, lots of property taxes, lots of wealth, right? I would like akin it now probably to like Walnut Creek, right? Like if you look at Walnut Creek School District, tons of money, tons of funding, tons of programs, right? And so um, I was afforded a very good education. I was afforded a very white education, and I was afforded special programs, right, that don't exist in the majority of the world. And I say that now because I'm a parent, right? My son's 8, and the public school system here is nothing like mine was. Mine was like they have these accelerated programs, and I was able to get into them because I, was smart and had the means, right, to go to extra tutoring and go to extra summer school, right? And I thought that was normal, right? And so I think because of all of that, I, you know, in conjunction with like my family experience, I grew up in an alcoholic home. And so I had the experience of being a child of an alcoholic. And one of the things that really cultivated within me, and I understand now that this is a white supremacist value, was like exceptionalism, perfectionism, right? And like always striving to be the best that I could be, right? To try and seek approval, I think, from my parents.
mhm,
But school was really a place where I felt valued,
mhm,
and I know that that is not the experience of everyone. But for me, it was. And I had teachers that, in a lot of ways, kind of showed up as parental figures for me, And so I guess all of that to say that I was never turned off to education. In fact, I was always encouraged to seek education and not necessarily from my family, but from my experiences with educators. And so, um, when it kind of came time for me to figure out what I wanted to do, I wasn't originally looking into education. I had gotten a lot of messaging, I think, from my family in particular that, anyone can teach. Right. And that it's not that great of a paying job. And you're so smart, Brittany. You could be a doctor, you could be a dentist, you could be, So I was on that path for a while, and it wasn't until really I got pregnant that I thought about being a teacher, right? Where it was like, okay, well, I'm going to have a kid. What's the best job to to have, right? To be a parent and also have a job. And I thought, you know what, an educator. And people had
Mhm.
always told me, Brittany, you have a great way of speaking, and you have a great way of teaching people. And I think it all kind of fell into place. But hindsight, thinking about that, right? Probably a large majority of the reason I had such a good experience in education is because I'm white, right?
Mhm.
Because statistics show, studies show, literature, research has shown us, right, that the experiences of white students in predominantly white schools are
Mhm.
better, exceedingly better than than students of color, right? Have those kinds of experiences in predominantly white institutions.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. And so in your career, how have you advocated for equity in your workplaces?
Yeah, so I think this is a good point for me to talk about kind of like my awakening, within this work.
Mhm.
Because I think when I first entered the education field, I wasn't very aware of social justice issues.
Mhm.
Um, and it's kind of funny because I went to my teacher prep program here in the Bay Area. I got my bachelor's degree here in the Bay Area, and I went through my entire bachelor's program, my entire credential program, without anyone ever talking about systemic racism, white
Mm.
supremacy, nothing. And I went to CSU East Bay. We're there right now. It's like a different school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, it wasn't until my first year teaching, I had done a professional development over the summer with my school that I was going to teach at with Facing History in Ourselves, which is an organization in Oakland that does teacher professional development. And they also do history curriculum, and it's all critically focused. But they came in, and I heard this history of just it was like cognitive dissonance, you
Mhm.
know. It was like, no, racism isn't over. And I was like, what do you mean racism isn't over? And it's like, here's what really happened, right? Here's what's still happening, right? And I think at that point it was like the white emotionality, the white rage, right?
Mhm.
Where I couldn't believe that I had been lied to. And then
Mhm.
I felt so much sadness and so much pain, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
For the fact that people of color, especially Black folks in this country, have been so marginalized and so oppressed. And I sat in that for a while, like this white rage, right? And slowly, right, in doing more learning about whiteness, white fragility, anti-racism, right, starting all of that inner work, I kind of came out of that white rage,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I got into the headspace of like, okay, so this is the way that it is. What am
Mhm.
I going to do about it? Right? What
Mhm.
can I do about it? And so one of the things I started to do at my first teaching job was I started to pay attention, right,
Mhm.
to like my own internal beliefs and biases, right, and how is that showing up in the classroom, right? Like I paid attention, like, okay, when I'm teaching, right, and a white kid calls out versus my student of color calls out, am I treating them the same,
Mhm.
right? And really being reflective on what was I doing, right, that was part of this problem, right, which is
Mhm.
a hard thing to do. And I think a lot of people don't even know to do it because you're never even taught that you should,
Right.
right? But those are some of the things that I started to do within myself. And then I started to look at the systems right at my school. And I
Mhm.
started to notice, right, that a lot of the suspensions that were happening, students of color, right, for that I know I've seen white kids do at my school, and they never, got suspended for. And I would call the administration on that, you
Mhm.
know, and surprise, surprise, they didn't like it. They didn't
Mhm.
want to hear it, you
Mhm.
know? And at the end of my, 3 years of teaching there, they let me go. And I have a suspicion that a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was calling them out on stuff, right?
Mhm.
Again, this is a completely white administration, right? I was calling them out on things that had to do with what they said they were about,
Mhm.
right? Social justice, blah, blah, blah. Look, we have Black people that work here. We've got gay people that work here. See how progressive we are. But they weren't looking, again, within really at the systems they had in place and how they were supporting students of color and how they were allowing whiteness to be so pervasive, right?
Mhm.
And so after I was let go from there, I started working at the Athenian School in Danville, and predominantly white private school, so different scene, than a public charter school where I was previously. And again, the mission, right? Like, oh, diversity, inclusion, equity, right? And I get there, and I'm like, hmm. What's really going on here,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And again, right, I'm the loud one, right? I'm the one who always wants to talk about, hey, are we looking at how white supremacy is playing into this? Are we looking at the culture of our programs? Are we looking at how we are supporting or not supporting,
Mhm.
right? And, I think at this point in time, because of the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement reignited really strongly last year, they're more willing to listen to me, you know.
Mhm.
Are they
Mhm.
going to do anything about it? I don't know, right? But I figure at least it's my responsibility as a white person to speak out against these things that are happening, to speak out against white supremacy culture, and in the same vein, to try and carry along some people with me, and get other people to understand and be
Mhm.
on board with looking within. But that's a hard sell. Right? Especially right now in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of all of the other political things that are going on, you
Mhm.
know? And I think as a white person, and I'll speak for myself on this one, because of the color of my skin, because of the privileges that I'm afforded, it's easy to turn it off, right? That
Mhm.
doesn't affect me. It's not in my life, right? And so I think that there's a real challenge there that I'm still working on. How do I navigate that? How do I learn how to bring folks along with me? How do I learn? Um, how do I get other people to want to learn, right? More about this and more about the importance of this. And working at a predominantly white institution with a predominantly white faculty and student body, right? That's a huge task. That's a huge ask, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. A lot of good stuff in there, Brittany. A lot of good stuff that you talked about. I'm gonna hold it for my pearls at the end. I won't stop your flow. I'm gonna move us into the third set of questions. And so, if you can define for the viewers, what is the construct of whiteness?
Yeah. So I'll just say, this is something that I've been studying for a while. I do not purport to know all the things about whiteness. I'm still learning. So what I'm saying today could change. I'm just gonna put that out there. But this is what I understand, to be true as today. Um, the reason that I call it the construct of whiteness is because whiteness was made up, right? You look back in history and there wasn't this terminology, right, of whiteness until a certain point. And when it came into existence, it came in as a way to divide
Mhm.
folks and
Mhm.
to exclude folks, right,
Mhm.
from being parts of conversations, from being parts of groups.
Mhm.
And, I'm a science teacher, so I'll speak from that side too. It's like biologically speaking, genetically speaking, we're all part of the same human race. And that was a scientific argument for a long time. It's like they're different than us genetically. Look at the size of their heads, their brains are smaller, like their features, right? They're more animal like, right? And all of this science was made up
Mhm,
to again back this construct of whiteness, right?
mhm,
And so when I say the construct of whiteness, I mean that this idea that there's this difference, right? Um, and that difference means explicitly that white is right, white is better,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Um, and that all of that is really just a construct, right? It was created
mhm.
to benefit white people, to benefit white people in power, really, right?
Yep. Thank you so much for explaining that. How does being white afford one certain opportunities over others?
Yeah. It's a really important question, and I think it's one that a lot of white people don't see and don't get. You
Mhm,
know, I think one of the ways that I've learned more about it is by listening to and reading the narratives of people of color, right?
mhm,
Specifically, Black artists or authors who write about their experiences, right? Um, I would say, when it comes to my own personal circle of people, I don't have a lot of people of color in my circle. And
mhm,
I don't know that all of them are necessarily comfortable telling me all about their experiences, right? So I think that's one really important thing that I've learned as a white person is like take advantage of the resources that are at your disposal to learn about these things and not expect, right, your friends of color to tell you their story and to tell you, right? Because there are actually folks out there who have written a book about that. And you
mhm,
can purchase that book and you can support that author and then you can learn, right, about other folks' experiences. Of course, if there are people in your circle willing to tell you,
mhm,
listen, of course, but don't expect that, right?
mhm,
Um, and so the question was not that. The question was, how does white skin afford people privileges? Okay. There are just a lot of things, right, that as a white person, I don't have to think about, right?
mhm,
And I think one of the seminal pieces of literature that, helped define that was um, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Gosh, Peggy McIntosh, right? And it's so basic. I remember reading that really early on in my journey and being like, holy shit. No, you're right. I don't have to think about being followed at the grocery store. I don't have to think about not finding a band aid that's the same color of my skin, right? I don't
mhm,
have to worry about finding housing in a nice neighborhood, right? All these things and then also like reading like The Color of Law, right, and understanding like the history of how housing was dealt with, you know
mhm.
during the times of pre-civil rights movement, right, and even now, right, that shit's still happening, right.
Exactly. Mhm,
um and so when you are white, life is inherently easier for you compared to any other race, ethnicity, right? And the reason is because, again, it goes back to this construct of whiteness. White is right, white
mhm,
is good, right? And who are the people in power,
mhm,
right? The people in power are white, people
mhm,
in power are usually male, right? And they have created the rules, right? So there's something that I, have come to know in our doctoral program, right? This idea of hegemonic or hegemonic whiteness, right? This idea that everything that is white is normal, right?
mhm,
That white supremacy foundations, things like perfectionism, right? Things like value of the written word over oral word,
mhm,
right? Are the standard.
mhm,
And so that has been programmed into all of us, no matter if we're white or not, right? We all get that messaging from a very young age. And so, because of your skin color, right? Because of my skin color being white,
Mhm.
things are inherently easier for me than they would be comparative to a person of color.
Mhm.
Does that mean that my life is easy? No, right? But it means that it is easier, right? And I think that's one thing that I see people get hung up on a lot with talking about whiteness, right? They want to say, "Oh, my life's hard," right? Yeah, my life was hard too, right? But I don't have to worry about the other things, right?
Mhm.
On top of, yeah, okay, I have anxiety. Yeah, okay, I grew up in an alcoholic home. Yeah, okay, whatever, right? Yeah, I'm queer. That people, white people, especially, I'll just say this in my experience, they want to capitalize on how they're an individual, how they're different, right? And that's another underlying foundation of white supremacy is individualism, right?
Mhm.
Like, and they want to believe that things are set up in a way that are equal. Because if they're not, right, then like they feel like they didn't get what they deserved, like, or they didn't work for what they got, you
Mhm.
know? And that's
Mhm.
a feeling that, can make someone feel uneasy,
Mhm.
right? Um, but that's the thing, right? These systems were set up like
Mhm.
this.
Absolutely.
They were set up to help the whites and disadvantage everyone else, right?
Mhm.
And so to me, the way that I was able to get past that reaction within myself, right, was to say, let's look at, let's look at, and again, I have a lot of respect for education. And so I think that, for me was easy to say, like, let's look and let's see what's been written, right?
Mhm.
Let's look and let's learn about the history, right, that's happened before I got here.
Mhm.
And I think looking at it from a systemic lens, right, that it's like this is how systems were built, helps me not attach it to me, right? Like people
Mhm.
want to say, like, oh, my grandparents were good people. Like, yeah, they probably were. It wasn't their fucking fault either, that they were white. You don't have to feel bad for being white, right?
Mhm.
But you do need to recognize, right, where you are at in complicity with whiteness. Because you
Mhm.
can't become unwhite,
Mhm.
but you can give up your whiteness in
Mhm.
certain ways to
Mhm.
break that racial solidarity, to
Mhm.
disrupt, and to make momentum toward, right, this anti-racist work that I'm so passionate about. It's
Mhm.
like you can't get there until you start dismantling it within yourself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just listening to you, I felt like when you said I've been in classes and I was a history major. So I've been in classes where we go back and forth and oh, this group had it worse. They were exterminated, and this group was enslaved, and this group was almost annihilated and taken off, wiped off the face of all these things, right? And so I think that that's where the human experience parallels, right? We all have traumas and triumphs and challenges and things that we have to go through and overcome and celebrate. But the key point that I heard you make was that it's not that my life is was easier or harder than yours. The system is set up for it to be easier for you to navigate
Mm,
because of that group that you're now connected to. Because I don't even want to say skin color because a lot of times people, and even today, in today's terms, so many groups that were not considered white in the past are now considered white.
yeah.
Group or certain people have tried to just lay off, like take their
Mm,
color off and just associate themselves with whiteness. And so when I heard you say that, what manifested for me was this idea of it's just easier for you to navigate these systems. And
mm,
just because it's easier, depending on the way that you dealt with the challenges and the traumas that have come into your life. And so that's why we do see some people, we talk about the poor white people in Appalachia and these other places. Well, they still have the the connection and the skin color to navigate through society easier but they just may not have the skill set or the know it all, the know how to actually engage or want to engage. And so I think it's just all these different pieces, but I really appreciate your commitment to anti-racist work and to like doing that introspective look that it takes sometimes to evaluate yourself, which can be hard because, of course, everything you think you do. I mean, I'm just thinking of myself is like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm like, okay, you can improve. So always thinking about
Mhm.
that. But I appreciate that commitment because most people, it's daunting and it can take a toll on you, right? And that's why it's good to have balance. So um, thank you for sharing about that. I'll move us into the fourth set of questions because we can talk about this all day. Um,
You know it.
yeah. Share anything you are doing to educate others on the disadvantages of focusing on whiteness.
Mm, yeah. So, I think that whiteness is a piece, right? It's a piece of a bigger puzzle,
Mhm.
right? And I think at the core of what I understand to be true,
Mhm.
I think that in order for there to be any progress, um, you have to focus on whiteness a little bit, because if you don't, then you get these white people that think that they understand, but they have no sense of what's happening within themselves,
Mhm.
right? It can easily become intellectualized, right? Like, of course, we should treat all people equally. Of course, they should have the same right opportunities. Of course, I'll give my money to these organizations. And like, those are all also good things.
Mhm.
But until white people wake up to the
Mhm.
realization of where they sit in history, right? And how they are complicit in the culture of power, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Until that happens, I don't think we're going to see a real dismantling, right, of white supremacy. It's going to need a whole lot of white folks to say, I'm not buying into that shit anymore,
Mhm.
right? I'm not
Mhm.
doing that. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to act that way. I'm not going to go to Christmas and sit around the table while my racist uncle tells jokes. I'm not going to go hang out with my friends and listen to them, talk about their coworkers who are people of color and make racist remarks, right? And those are such little things, but they happen all the time in white people's world, and nobody says nothing about it, right? And the reason they don't is because we're not taught to deal with our own whiteness. We're not taught to deal with issues of race, right? No one talks about it. White people, nope. Oh, it's not polite to talk about people's race, right? I remember, Rika, this one time we were at Benihana for my son's birthday dinner. We were
Mhm.
there with his dad, me, Braden, and across the way there was a black family also having dinner. And my son says, Mom, look at that black boy over there, you know. And we talk about how we have friends that are black, right? We talk about the struggles of black Americans. We've talked about that as a family. We've read stories about that, right? And history and narratives about that. And so there, to me, there's nothing wrong, right? And my son proceeded to say, I like his jacket, right?
Mhm.
My son's dad was there and he goes, "Oh, shh, be quiet." Right? And I'm like, "What?" you know?
Mhm.
And it was like, "You can't say that someone's black," is what he says to my son, right? And again, it's like that programming we receive, right? Of being told it's not nice to talk about race, right? It's not nice to point out differences in others, right? And to a certain extent, I understand that. And if we don't acknowledge the differences, we're not
Mhm.
going to get anywhere, right? If we
Mhm.
just keep pretending like everyone is the same and equal, we're not going to get anywhere, right?
Yes.
So that's just an example of how, small these things can be,
Mhm.
that, white people accustomed their whole lives like this, right?
Mhm.
They don't see it, right? And so, while whiteness is not the most important, I- you know, piece of the puzzle, I don't think. I think the most important piece of the puzzle is anti-racism and liberation, right?
Mhm,
For all folks, right?
mhm,
And I
mhm,
see understanding whiteness as a key element of getting to that goal.
mhm, mhm. Ooh, I heard a lot. I'm going to save most of it, but I do want to just touch on. You talked about basically teaching positive racialization in schools. That's what I'm hearing you saying. That needs to happen because, for instance, you see the same thing with Black kids, right? If they're in a restaurant and they're the only kids of color in there and they may want to be doing what the other kids are doing, the parent is constantly telling them, you can't do that because they're not going to look at you the same. And
Mm,
so on all sides, like instead of us being able to celebrate that boys and girls are going to be in a restaurant, they're going to get up and probably explore because they're at that age, right? So,
right.
like having these conversations in elementary so that the kids start understanding, because most of the parents, well, all of the parents, let's just say, were conditioned under a system where we didn't do that. And so, if we
Right.
are going to change that, one, it needs to happen. We need to have those learning spaces or radical healing spaces or spaces where we can have these conversations in public, but they also should be taking place starting in kindergarten. Like we shouldn't wait till
Absolutely.
fourth and fifth grade because that's what, no, I think if you start, like you condition them with all things American starting in kindergarten. So
Mm,
why couldn't we
right.
start teaching them positive racialization? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what that brought up for me. But thank you for sharing about sharing that experience. Have you taken any action to eradicate power, privilege, and oppression?
Yeah. I mean, I think, for me, it's speaking up, you know,
Mhm,
when I
mhm,
see something, say something. That's kind of my thing, see something, say something. And it's not always easy, right? Sometimes it happens in my own home, right?
mhm,
Sometimes it happens at school. Sometimes it happens out in the world,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And I think building that capacity, right? It's so funny because we talk about building capacity in white folks, right? To talk about race, to talk about issues of oppression and white supremacy and right. We have to build a capacity within the white people to do this, right? And it's like I don't know. In some ways, it sounds to me a little bit like coddling. Okay, I'm just going to be real.
right, 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 right.
Especially when you think about the fact that people of color, they have to build that capacity starting when they're born, right?
Mhm,
Out in the world. They don't get a chance to later catch up on it, right? Um, but within myself, I think constantly immersing myself in the work, right, in introspection, in community with other white folks who are also looking to dismantle white supremacy within themselves. I'm a part of Surge Bay Area. They're an organization standing up for racial justice, that their mission is literally to get fucking white people to
mhm,
understand what the hell's going on, right, with
mhm,
racial justice, right? To learn about how these things are impacting ourselves and then
mhm,
also the effects right out in the world. I recently have started attending events with CRC, Community Ready Corps, um, Allies and Accomplices, which is a sister organization to CRC, Community Ready Corps in Oakland, doing great community work for folks there. And really surrounding myself with like minded people, right? Who aren't there to screw around, for lack of a better word, right? Because I think, again, it's so easy for white people to defer, right? And push it off and be like, oh, no, not me. I have a black friend. I have, a black cousin or whatever, and exclude themselves from this work, right?
mhm,
But really doing the inner work within myself,
mhm,
I think helps me to become more courageous, right? Because as more I learn and more I read and more I immerse myself, the more confident I get with saying like, hey, that's a microaggression, right?
mhm,
I've read a lot about microaggressions and I know what it is. And that's what I just saw, right?
mhm,
And even being able to just name things, right? And have the language. A lot of white people, especially me, I get caught up on words sometimes, right? And I'm like, okay, I want to say the right thing, right? I want to be, again, white supremacy, woohoo. I want to be perfect, right? I want to sound this way, right? And so doing that inner work and reading, and not just reading white people, right? Because, like, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, great book. A lot of white people, they're done after that book. They're like, oh, I understand white fragility. I'm not going to be fragile anymore. Goodbye. Right? It's like, no, you got to start reading other folks, people of color, right? Um, Ibram Kendi is very mainstream right now, and he's got a lot of great books about the history of racism and oppression in America, right? And the entanglement with capitalism and white supremacy structure. Um, Ijoma Olu, who wrote So You Want to Talk About Race, is another great book. She just released another book, Mediocre, which is all about the white patriarchy. And so, not just talking about it with other white people, because I think that's dangerous too, right? You can get into these circles, right? Where it's like, oh, yeah, woo, we're white people, we're doing the thing, woo, woo, right? But then there's no accountability to the movement, right?
Yeah.
That people of color are leading, right? And that's what I love about Surge Bay Area and CRCAA, is that both of them are tied to Black-led organizations, right? And are taking direction from them. What do you need white people to understand? What do you need white people to help back you on, right? What do you need from us? You need money? Great, we'll fundraise for you, right? That's what we're good at. Um, and so I think, being accountable to some bigger cause, right? That's not just a anti-racist book club of white people, right? Because I think that you can get stuck in a rut, right? Within yourself. You think you're doing the work, but then you're not actually applying it to anything, right? There's no greater goal besides, like, I'm going to get myself woke, which, by the way, is not a thing. And it's a constant work you have to be doing, it never ends. It's a lifelong work.
We there was an abolitionist meeting for Cal State East Bay that I went to. It might have been last week.
Yeah,
And
on Wednesday, right?
yeah, and one of the panelists was like, she's tired of people being woke offs. So it appears that they're woke, but when you really look at what they're doing, it's they're woke off. So they're, one, trying to get their name out there, or get a bunch of following for themselves. But then when you look at the argument and just the way they set it up, the language is geared toward academia. So who are you going to change with the language, right? And so realizing, who is my audience for this? If I'm trying to abolish prisons or school systems that are not equitable, who is my audience? Is it academia? Most likely not. I'm trying to get the masses to follow in to understand why, right? Why we should end the prison system and all of these things. And so when she said woke off, I was like, that's deep. It was just a deep, yeah. We'll talk offline we'll talk online who she was referring to, but it was a little deep. Okay, I'm moving along. Thank you for sharing. How do you advocate for your students of color in predominantly white educational settings?
That's a tough one, and it's one that I think I still have a lot to learn, you know.
Mhm.
I think for me, it starts by forming relationships, right? I think that in a traditional teacher prep setting, we're taught that, students should respect us, right? Students should listen to us, right? And we're kind of given the keys to power, right? And so really working on decentering myself as the expert, right, as the teacher, and reinstating myself more as a facilitator of learning, and taking the time to get to know my students, right? And guess what? Not everyone's going to respect you right away. That's like a white thing, right? Like it's like a white thing that, you know, everybody respects everybody. Everybody's nice to everybody. It's like I realize that, my students of color, they might not respect me. They might, but they might not. right?
Mhm.
And if they don't, it's probably because they've had a lot of white teachers that didn't give a shit about them. And so why should they care about me? You know? So really taking the time to get to know and understand my students, I think is one tool that I use. And extending that support as often as possible, right? I'm not going to assume that my students of color need extra support, but
Mhm.
just like I let all my other students know, I'm here for you, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
In these COVID times, it's been especially hard, um, because I could have a student that shows up to my class that maybe doesn't turn their camera on the whole time, right? And I could assume several things about that, but I try not to assume anything, right? I'm more now in the mode of, okay, how can I support you? So sending them a little chat saying, hey, hope you're doing well today. Is there anything I can do for you? Yes or no? A lot of the time it's no. Great. I'm not going to take that personally, right? I'm
Mhm.
not here to be the white savior. I'm here to be an ally in learning, right?
Mhm.
And a facilitator of learning.
Mhm.
So I think really that that piece too, right? Because it's easy for a teacher, a white teacher, to go into this, white savior complex, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh yeah, we're at a predominantly white school. Most of the students are well off, but all of the students of color are disadvantaged and blah, 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 blah. So that's actually not the case, right? But
Mhm.
I think it's really easy for people who are unaware to make those associations, right? Like it's like the association that white folks have when they say urban schools,
Mhm.
but they mean black schools,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Uh-huh.
and it's all of that coded language. So really trying to step out of that and step into being present, right, with my students, getting to know them, not trying to be the white savior, not trying to be the person in charge, but really forming those relationships, and offering that support in whatever capacity I'm able to, and I leave it open. Like, hey, you want chemistry help? Great, come to office hours. You want to chat? Come to office hours. You got a problem? Come to office hours. And I think that fosters a better relationship, hopefully, between my students of color and myself, um, because at least they know that I'm being authentic and I'm being myself. And I guess that's one more thing is like really being authentic, really showing up as me. I tell them parts of my life that I don't have to tell them, but I figure, you know what? Maybe if they know that I'm a person, right? Maybe if they know that I struggle with things, maybe if they know that I make mistakes, then they'll feel more comfortable, right? Opening up to me. I don't know.
I love that strategy. I think I think with young people, any young people, they can read through the mask and the BS anyway, so they know who's authentic. Um, and over time, if you're good at putting on masks, they can read over time too if it's phony and fake. So I think that is where all education starts. So
Mhm.
thank you for lifting that up. I have one final question that I'm sneaking in there because I'm just curious
Ooh,
because of the conversation. So, what role do you see yourself in when working in solidarity with social justice groups?
yeah. I think the role that I see myself in is, currently a supporter and a learner right
Mhm.
now. I really do think for myself, I've got a long way to go.
Mhm.
Um, I'm, constantly reading, constantly attending events where I'm learning. And I really don't feel like I can really call myself like an accomplice or an ally at this point. I think that those words get thrown around a lot and people want to claim them, right? And one thing that I heard in a recent um, talk that I was in, I think it was with CRCAA, Allies and Accomplices. They were talking about allyship and they were talking about how you don't get to claim that you're an ally, right? That term is actually given to you by folks of color and can be revoked,
Mm.
right? And can be situational, right? So they were talking about an example of a time when they were in a situation and they didn't know whether or not they should say something, and it was like they ended up saying something, and
Mhm.
then the person of color was like, I didn't need you to say anything for me. you know?
Mm,
And so it made me think about how these terms that we use, ally, accomplice, co-conspirator, right? It's like this badge you want to earn, but it's not that cut and dry, you
mhm,
know? And so for me, I think the position that I'm taking as a learner and supporter is trying to learn, okay, how do I become an ally, right? How do I become an authentic supporter? How do I become someone that a person of color can look to and
mhm,
say, like, I know she's on my team and I know I can call on her when I need, you
mhm,
know? I was just on a call the other night with CRCAA, and they were talking about the march in Oakland. It was a car caravan that happened on MLK Day. I don't know if you heard about this.
did, I
Um,
did.
yeah, and they encountered in this neighborhood this white guy with a gun, right? And they had Terha on the call, who was there and managing the event. And he was talking about how at that moment, he needed white people like this woman who was in the call as well, who happened to be there, Katie. We need people like her to do what we ask her to do. And that's it, right? And there were these questions from audience members about, like, well, wouldn't it have been better if a white person would have stepped in and talked to the white man, or wouldn't it have been better? And Terha was like, no, we knew how to handle it. We have training and de-escalation. And I needed Katie to the white woman, I needed her to get those cars out of there. I needed her to move people out. That's what I needed her to do. And that's what she did. Right. And that was her job. Right?
Mhm,
She wasn't the white savior. She
mhm,
wasn't nobody gave her an award,
right,
right? And she acted on what she had learned about, which was listening to Black leadership and showing up when asked, right? And so, I guess what I'm saying is that I still got a lot to learn, Rika. I don't know where I'll be in this movement, you
mhm,
know, I hope to keep, doing the self work, keep educating myself, keep listening to leadership of color, and um, keep bringing white folks along with me to learn
mhm.
some more. I
That's
think
awesome.
that's my role right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for being honest about your role because I'm glad that you pointed out the terms that people tend to take up because they may make a lot of posts or they made a Facebook group or just some other events and things that they may do. I've been reading a lot of Bettina Love lately, so a lot around
Yeah.
that co-conspirator and hearing you talk about Katie, we along with the construct of whiteness, titles and all these other things are important to us. But the truth of the matter is, if Katie hadn't moved those cars, that incident could have gone to something else. And so now you tie it back into the pandemic and essential workers and why they make probably the least amount of money compared to other people. It's all
Mm,
these things that you start connecting and you're like, okay, so what role do I play? I do not have to be the face. I just need to do something that's contributing to the whole. And so that's tapping that inner work is important because then you tap into your purpose, why you were born. And a lot of times we get, I know I'm taking this to another place, but it's coming up for me. We get sidetracked by by the titles and the things that people, oh, I see you are a ally and I can see it. And we run with those things instead of actually having discovering that because what we are is inside of us. And through our experiences and through our learnings and knowledge and experience, all these things, we start to that what did Dr. G talk about becoming? We are
mm-hmm.
so I can't, today I may be an ally. Tomorrow I may not be an ally because I may be becoming something that no longer suits what I was an ally for, right? But I think like the main thing that stuck out to me for that is one, if I get to know people and their needs, I won't need to be a savior because really it's about coaching people to what they already have inside of them, right? So
Mm,
that's my kind of tidbit on that story you shared about MLK Day. I had saw that and was just like, what in the world? Um, but I want
mm,
to highlight and lift up some of the pearls that I heard you say throughout our conversation. I won't share all of them because there are a lot, but I'll just highlight a few that really stuck out to me. Um, Be willing to take an people need to be willing to take an introspective look and assess their own biases, their behaviors, their values, and change and be willing to change what does not work, right? Then I heard you say recognize that systems, institutions, and policies need to change. Attitudes and behaviors, I know so they do too. But in my mind, it's like if we can change the systems, right? Then those behaviors can change. We can do all the DEI trainings and all of the professional development that we want. But if we're not
Yeah.
changing the policies that are toxic, if we're not changing the institutions and the systems, we're just working in vain, right? Um, I heard you also say we all need to learn to deal with the issue of race. We have to stop running from it. It has to stop being that pink elephant in the room. I heard you say when you see something, say something. I love that because so many times we have been that bystander to something and thought and looked and said, well, maybe they're going to call, or maybe that
Mhm.
person is going to say something. And we know it's that thing tugging on us, telling us we really should step in. So you saying that today just challenged me. I'm going to really make myself more aware when I'm in positions so that even those small microaggressions, all those things that are done daily throughout our lives, that I can start calling people out on them and hopefully changing some behaviors. And then the final one I'll just share for now is promoting relationships over reforms. In a time of standardized testing and the meritocracy, when I heard you say taking the time to get to know the students, and I know it's difficult even having distance learning, but being able to send a chat, it may start out as a yes or no, but next time you might get a no because this, right? And so that's
Right.
slowly building and understanding that young people, I heard you say something else earlier about maybe they haven't had white adults in their life that that were respectful to them or great experiences. But I think just adults in general, some young people we come across are not getting nurturing from adults. They're being neglected. They don't have access to adults of any color that's pouring into them.
Mhm.
And so sometimes you may be the only adult that can pour into that student, that may see that student, that may hear them, that may value them. And I think that's important too. I'm glad that you lifted that up. And so, again, I want to say thank you for being on. You shared a wealth of knowledge with us. I would love to have you back one day for whatever other topic you want to discuss. But if you have one last tip, piece of advice, or just something that you want to share with the viewers, the last voice that they hear will be yours.
Thank you so much, Rika. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk with you today. And, just thinking about what I want to say last, I guess that it would just be, there's always work to do, you know, and I guess I feel like if you're listening to this and, you're a person of color, share it with a white friend. you know no matter if they're in the realm of understanding their whiteness or not, it might be good for them to hear. I think that we got a lot of work to do, and I don't know you know everything about all this, but I think too, just thinking about there's always more to learn, right? There's always more work to do. There's always more to learn. And so hopefully this brought some epiphanies and knowledge to y'all. And thank you so much for having me, Rika.
Thank you.